Audio 4.03.
Paris, New York. What comes to mind when you think about these cities? I bet if we compared our ideas, they'd all be pretty similar. Not because we've all been to those places, but because we've been sold a brand. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Place branding. We're all familiar with the idea that companies have to advertise and market their products in order to sell them. But cities and countries are increasingly finding themselves in a similar position. There are just under 200 countries in the world and thousands of cities, and these places know that they are competing with each other for tourists, trade, and investment from businesses, all of which can make a huge difference to their economy and the standard of living their people can enjoy. It's also easy for places to build up a negative image over time. Perhaps a city has become associated with high levels of crime, or a country is still remembered for a disaster that happened 20 years ago. Without branding and marketing, how can places compete and attract the tourists and investment they need? Let's look at a well-known example from the past to see what difference an effective branding campaign can make. In the late 1970s, New York City was in trouble. It was experiencing financial problems, and levels of crime in the city were sky high. In fact, there was so much crime in the city that for a while, unions had been running a campaign called Welcome to Fear City, which encouraged people to stay away from the city and advised them to never use the subway because it was so risky. It was clear that something needed to change. The city needed to find a way to change its image and bring in tourists and revenue. So, the New York Department of Commerce increased its tourism budget and invested in a bold rebranding campaign to make New York seem like an exciting, attractive place to visit. The result was the iconic phrase, "I love New York," with a heart instead of the word love, which can still be seen on t-shirts and other merchandise today. And the result of the campaign? The state's income from visitors tripled within a few years, and New York became one of the world's go-to tourist destinations. It's strange to think that soon people will have been wearing those famous I Love New York t-shirts for over 60 years. Where would New York be now if that campaign hadn't happened? So, how should places approach rebranding? The example of New York shows the power of a visual approach and a clear logo. Another example of this is Paris, where the branding uses an oversized A in the city's name to represent its most famous monument, the Eiffel Tower. Again, this was a striking visual image. Who could fail to recognize it? It immediately advertised the Eiffel Tower and promoted the city as a tourist destination with interesting things to see and do. And the huge advantage of such a simple logo like this is that it can be used everywhere, from billboards on the walls of buildings to the sides of buses and information flyers for tourists. With any luck, images of the logo might also appear online and go viral, reaching an audience of millions. But sometimes a more subtle approach is required. In 2005, Chile ran a campaign based around the slogan, "Chile, always surprising." Despite the hype of the campaign, it was not as successful as hoped, and the country has now given up simple slogans and instead has been using a less direct and more long-term approach, encouraging businesses to all use a similar national logo and message to promote themselves to customers abroad. The message focuses on what are seen as the country's main selling points, its range of natural attractions from deserts to glaciers, the stability of its government, and the enterprising nature of the population. This approach of selling a common message seems to be working. Foreign investment in the country has increased in recent years, and tourist numbers have hit record highs. Another rule for place branding is to focus on the positive aspects of a place's individual heritage. There's no point in going for bland, generic tourist appeal, but instead, places should think about what makes them unique and interesting. A good example of this is the campaign by the city of Barcelona to rebrand one of its districts, El Raval. The district was different to the standard tourist areas with their beautiful architecture and large stores, and it wasn't popular. So the city used the idea of the area being alternative to create its modern image of being vibrant, diverse, creative, and cool. As part of the campaign, they even invented a new verb, ravaler, meaning to wander around El Raval and soak up the lively atmosphere. My time's nearly up, but I just want to think about what happens once a campaign has run its course. Is the job done? Will the campaigns I've talked about still be running in 20 years' time? The answer is no. Let's go back to New York City. The initial rebranding of the 1970s created the image of a fun city for tourists to visit, but it focused mainly on Manhattan, with its well-known monuments and the big stores. In 2006, there was a push to promote other parts of the city and target a new generation of tourists. A new logo was developed, which showed a kaleidoscope of different images of the city to reflect the diversity of the different areas of the city. This created a new wave of tourism, not only to Manhattan, but to Brooklyn and other boroughs. So, branding is an ongoing and creative process, and places need to constantly be on their toes to remain competitive and popular. So, think about your town or city. Could it benefit from new branding? And what kind of image would you want to create for it? Thank you.